Matt Chapman just signed a 3-year deal with the San Francisco Giants, and a lot of people are angry at Ross Atkins for not matching that deal and bringing the third baseman back to Toronto. Did he want to come back? Did he want to leave the Blue Jays? We'll break that down and much more in this episode of Jays Digest. What's up, Jays fans? I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Gosse, and as though the tune has changed around Matt Chapman throughout the past month plus over here. At the beginning of the offseason, a lot of people were very hesitant to want to bring him back to the Blue Jays. They didn't want to commit over $100 million plus to him and tie down the position for the foreseeable future because he has been declining offensively and defensively in the past 2 seasons with the Toronto Blue Jays. So I understood the hesitation there, but the price kept dropping, and we saw Cody Bellinger return to the Chicago Cubs for $80 million after with opt-outs after the first year, opt-outs after the second year, and he was seeking $200+ million. That ended up not happening. So the price was naturally going to drop for another Scott Boras client in Matt Chapman, and a lot of Blue Jay fans were warming up to the idea of bringing him back on a 1-year deal with some opt-outs after the first year. So I was one of those people. I didn't want to give him 5 years. I didn't want to give him $100+ million. But Nick, it made sense to bring back Matt Chapman at least for this season because we're watching this team play in spring training, and there's no clear-cut option at third base. There's no one guy that stands out above the rest. Maybe that'll change when Kevin Biggio comes back and he looks like he's ready to go. But as it stands right now, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa has been getting the majority of the playing time at third base. Eduardo Escobar, who's not even on the 40-man roster, has had a few appearances there, and I mean, there's just no clear-cut number one option, whereas with Matt Chapman, you knew exactly what you were going to get out of him. I'm still not too heartbroken over him choosing the Giants, but a lot of fans are very upset about it.
They are not happy with Ross Atkins. Sorry, but a quick reminder: hit the subscribe button before we get into it. Now, Peter, this happened late last night, and I was looking at the reactions live on Twitter as Jeff Passan, and actually John Heyman was the first one. But third baseman Matt Chapman and the Giants, like you said, a 3-year, $54 million with an opt-out after each one. And we kind of mentioned it's similar to the Bellinger one. It's kind of a pillow deal where if Matt Chapman performs great next season, he can opt out and hopefully get a better contract. And if not, then he might be he can just opt back in for whatever it is, 16 or 18 and then 16 million. But we've been on the record saying on a 2-year deal, definitely. A 3-year is a bit more interesting, but I think the Jays could have matched this all day at 3 years, 54. The question is, did San Francisco or Matt Chapman want to go to San Francisco instead of obviously staying in Toronto? And I believe he's a California native, so I mean, it could make a lot more sense for him to just want to go there, but Peter, fans are not happy. We have tons of different people, and this one got a lot of traction. This Chapman deal really caps off a brutal offseason for the Jays. Cherry on top. Even if we acknowledge he's a far from perfect player, this is still a deal they should have tried hard to do. I tend to agree with the second part of this. We're said it more than anyone about how it's he's a bit of a flawed player, but for $54 million, we gave IKF 2 years, a lot of money. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would have brought him back for sure, but I think you hit the nail on the head there, Nick. I believe he just didn't want to come back.
Agreed.
And he didn't take the qualifying offer from the Blue Jays, which was around 20-ish million. So he would have got the same amount of money for this year and would have been able to hit the free agent market the next offseason. But it's entirely possible that he just wanted to go home. He is a West Coast guy, and he spent the majority of his major league career in Oakland, playing with some pretty good Oakland A's ball clubs, and it's very possible that he just wanted to go home and go back to the Bay Area where he made a name for himself as an Oakland A's. So I think his skill set is going to play well in San Francisco. I think his defense is really going to shine in that lineup, and I mean, good for him. Good for him. He got paid. He gets to go back home, and I think the whole situation here was that he just didn't want to come back to Toronto. There seemed to be not tension between the two sides, but he turned down a $100 million deal from the Jays in the offseason prior, before the season started. So maybe he just didn't want to come back, and I think that's what we're going to chalk this up to. He is a flawed player. In his last 450 plate appearances with the Blue Jays, he had an OPS under 700. He barely hit over 200 when it comes to batting average. So, yeah, he struggled offensively, and I'm not very torn about him choosing the San Francisco Giants. Good for him. Got his money. You can never get mad at someone for chasing the most amount of money because players' careers are short, and we're not going to get on a player for going out and getting the most amount of dollars that he can. But I'm truly not too heartbroken over this, Nick, because I look at all the three guys that have made appearances or that will make appearances at third base this year for the Blue Jays, and I think they can give you better offensive production than Matt Chapman. Obviously, worse defense, which is going to hurt, but it's not as crucial as people are making it out to be. Third base defense is not the end-all, be-all when we're looking at overall team defense. I think shortstop defense is a lot more important, and Matt Chapman helped out with that when he was here. I mean, Bo Bichette got better when Matt Chapman was here defensively, but look, man, I'm not too worried about him going to the Bay and not lining up with the Toronto Blue Jays. Would they have been a better team with Matt Chapman? Maybe, but it's also entirely possible that we get a Kevin Biggio breakout season with everyday playing time, and I think that'll play itself out.
That's possible as well. IKF's actually having a very solid spring as well. It's just that obviously his ceiling is not as high as Matt Chapman's. Well, maybe it could be because IKF's defense is very, very good. But looking at Matt Chapman, he honestly had a pretty good season last year peripheral-wise. But, I mean, you mentioned it. You look at it since he came with the Jays. He never really approached his Oakland self. He never had an OPS over 800. He was a very, very bad hitter last season aside from his little stretch. And it's not to harp on Matt Chapman, but we're talking about coming into the season or coming into the offseason. We thought he was going to get 120, 150, and he got 54 million. Like, the market is completely, and maybe in hindsight now, Ross Atkins wouldn't have rushed the IKF signing and maybe would have held out and paid this for Matt Chapman, but they had no one knew that the market was going to be this bad, so they ultimately got their guy in IKF, and Biggio's obviously going to be playing a lot of third as well, and I think they just decided that he was the better guy. And Scott Mitchell had something to say here. He said, Blue Jays must have no payroll wiggle room because this is the type of deal I expected them to match, especially because Chapman is going to opt out in 8 months. Head scratcher, they'd offer 6/120 within the past year, then not circle back to this. Now, this was also the 6/120 was before his season last year, where he had a pretty significant decline, at least from a visual perspective. And Peter, I think I'm kind of with you in the sense of I just think he didn't necessarily want to return to Toronto after all of that, and he'd rather just go to San Francisco. Because I can't imagine the Jays would have beat this out by enough for him to want to come back to Toronto if that was his reason for leaving anyway. So I think that's what I'm going to chalk it down to as well. It does suck because he's a very good player, but unfortunately, I mean, at the end of the day, the Jays are going to need to have internal step-ups. So any quick final thoughts? I think he just didn't want to come back to Toronto.
Yeah, again, I agree with you on that. And this team will only go as far as their top guys take them. And the best acquisitions that they could make is Vladdy returning to his 2021 form, Bo Bichette continuing to roll, and George Springer being the guy that they went out and signed from the Houston Astros a few years ago. Those are the best acquisitions that this team could make. And if you brought Matt Chapman back, sure, it would help, and maybe you would have a bit more consistency at the third base position. But if Vladdy puts up the same numbers that he did last year, we're going to be talking about the same story again. And how many times have we repeated this? Like, I don't want to sound like a broken record. Like, I'm just repeating myself over and over again. But the best players that you can acquire are going to be the guys internally taking a step up and returning to form and being the guys that we think they can be. If you don't get that production from them, then it's going to be another disappointing season for the Blue Jays. Obviously, can't read too much into the spring training results thus far. We've got to wait and see. But for the people calling for Ross Atkins' head because he didn't bring back Matt Chapman, should be thankful they didn't give him 6 years, $120 million before last season started, because that would be an albatross of a contract as we're talking about it right now. And that wiggle room that Scott Mitchell is talking about is probably even less if you have Matt Chapman signed for $20 million a year over the next 6. So, like I said, I'm not going to harp on this too much. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And I believe that some internal guys can step in and give you the same production, if not better, than Matt Chapman did last year offensively, because he wasn't good. If you take away that first month of the season, the first month and a half of the season, if you want to stretch it a little bit, he was a below-average hitter for the majority of the season. He wasn't good offensively, and he was a strikeout machine, which is not what this team needs right now. They need guys that are going to put the ball in play and drive in runs, and Matt Chapman didn't really help out with that last year.
Yeah, it's lucky for Ross that they didn't accept that 6/120 because, like you said, it would have been a bit rough. But let us know your thoughts are on that. And one quick thing before we wrap up is Manoah's injured. You mentioned it, Peter, was supposed to start today, and unfortunately, Not necessarily injured in a bad way. He felt some soreness in his right shoulder during a bullpen session yesterday, so the Jays are bumping him from tomorrow's start, or supposed to start tomorrow. No structural damage, and the Jays hope the break is required a short term per manager John Schneider. Peter, anything throwing off Alek Manoah from his regime and this early in spring training is probably not a good sign, especially considering the fact he's battling for that fifth starter spot. Unfortunate. Do you have any thoughts on this? This is right after getting lit up against whatever team he played against in his first start there.
Yeah, I mean the Tigers had their way with him in the first game that he started there, and same. It's similar to the Ricky Tiedemann situation. It could be a minor setback, but this is like hampering him going forward. We wanted to see Alek Manoah get as many reps as he could, kind of reach that 50 to 65 pitch count towards the end of spring, and he may not get to do that. He's probably going to face some live hitters. It's probably just some soreness, and he'll be back in a couple of days, but he's throwing him off his routine. And for a guy that is competing for that final roster spot, this doesn't do him any favors. And right now the Jays are playing against the Braves, or I believe in the third or fourth inning at the time of this recording. Bowden Francis is about to pitch, and he's expected to be stretched out to 45 pitches or approximately 3 innings today. And if he does well, and if he continues to show that good stuff that he did at the end of last season, I wouldn't be shocked if he's the one that takes that fifth starter spot by the horns and really runs away with it, because Alek Manoah needed a lot of things to go his way to really wrap it up and secure that final spot. But now that he's hurt, and we don't really know how severe it is, probably isn't that severe, but even if it's just a little ailment and he's not able to pitch or throw for the next few days, and that could hurt him in terms of fighting for that final spot. So I think right now it's Bowden Francis's to lose. The way that he pitched in his first outing, he looked good against the Yankees, and I'm sure he'll look good today against the Braves, who don't have their full lineup out there. But it's going to be interesting to monitor throughout the rest of the spring training season here, and feel bad for Alek, because he really needed these starts and he really needed the reps in order to get ahead, and right now he's behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, it makes the decision a lot harder for Ross Atkins, depending how they go and depending how Bowden Francis does, who's kind of been the guy who could be the number one option for the fifth starter spot, that is, going forward. And he's young, and he saw some great flash of potential last season. But that'll wrap it up. Let us know your thoughts are on this. If you're unhappy with this, I saw a lot of Jays fans out there upset they didn't match this. So let us know your thoughts are on that. If you want to check out our video from yesterday, click on your screen now, and we'll see you tomorrow.